Joining me now is David Pine. David, welcome back to the broadcast. Every day we say it. We're getting closer and closer and closer to World War III. Now Putin says he has to respond. President Trump said I had a phone call with him, but he's going to have to respond to the attack on his bombers. And so I don't know what's coming, but I do want to play some clips tonight of our friend, the late Dr. Peter Vincent, who predicted so much of this. But first, give us the latest update between Russia and Ukraine.
Hey, Brian, great to be with you. So President Trump posted a Truth Social about his 1 hour and 15-minute call with Russian President Putin. And he's normally pretty upbeat about it. Talks about how it's a tremendous call and peace is, just weeks away. This one was a little bit more subdued. I think the call was likely initiated by Putin, basically to tell Trump that maybe to put Zelensky on a leash, and he wanted to confront Trump to see if Trump would admit whether the U.S. had foreknowledge or even potential involvement in the strikes, Operation Spiderweb against 4 Russian nuclear bomber bases. And Trump, of course, denied that. It's very possible he didn't know about it. It's also possible, as we discussed previously, that, the CIA did know about it and didn't tell the president. But basically, Putin, as Trump stated in the Truth Social post, Putin said there is going to be retribution for that attack against Ukraine. And there's no way out of that. He's got to retaliate.
I don't know if you've seen this clip. Have you seen this clip, Peter? Does that look like something's taken place in the last day or so? Not Peter. Sorry, David. David. All right, let's play it. You guys are going to have to read the subtitle because I'm sure they're not speaking in English. I'm sure it's Russian. Here we go.
Орешник по своим характеристикам сегодня не имеет аналогов в мире. Боевое оснащение ракеты позволяет гарантированно преодолевать любые существующие и перспективные средства противоракетной обороны. Данным ракетным комплексом с гиперзвуковыми блоками возможно поражать различные цели, от одиночных до площадных, а также высокозащищенных с высокой эффективностью. Исходя из поставленных задач и дальности действий данного оружия, оно может поражать цели на всей территории Европы, что выгодно его отличает от других видов высокоточного оружия большой дальности. Как вы уже сказали, массированное применение данного вида оружия будет сопоставимо с применением ядерного оружия. Разработка ракетного комплекса «Орешник» позволит расширить боевые возможности ракетных войск стратегического назначения по поражению различных типов целей в соответствии с поставленными задачами как в неядерном, так и в ядерном снаряжении. Высокая оперативная готовность комплекса позволяет в кратчайшие сроки провести переприцеливание по любому назначенному объекту и нанести ему поражение. С учетом положительного результата проведенного пуска полагается целесообразным принять комплекс на вооружение, продолжить дальнейшее использование с наращиванием характеристик и совершенствованием навыков личного состава по его эксплуатации и применению. Доклад закончен.
All right, now I don't know when that was, but he's certainly talking about this missile system they have that seems pretty advanced. Is that what we in America have also dubbed Satan II? Is that our nickname for it?
No, this is a brand new IRBM. It's called the Oreshnik IRBM by the Russians, and it's basically a shorter range version of an ICBM they have. I think it's SS-26, but I'm not certain. But it's got just a minimal. It's actually borderline ICBM range. I think I think it's about 3,500 miles or thereabouts. It can range all of Europe. The Russians have specifically threatened to use it on, I think, on NATO headquarters or any other target. Perhaps presidential palace in Kyiv, or perhaps against Ukrainian Ministry of Defense buildings in Kyiv as well.
Well, have you seen this? Did this really happen? Russia struck the regional administration building in Kherson for the second time today, this time with a missile. Half the building is simply gone. Is that an accurate report?
I haven't seen that report yet. I would assume so.
And what does that mean? If it is an accurate report, what does that mean? I mean, what are they doing? What are they doing before the big strike? Are they taking out administrative facilities where major players are, where they're monitoring stuff? What would be the reason for this first?
Well, my assumption is that building was likely some kind of military headquarters or regional defense hub, communications hub, perhaps. Basically, they're already in the process of kind of a six-axis offensive, and it's not a huge or massive offensive, but it's an offensive at multiple locations, and it's designed to whittle down Ukrainian reservists because their reserves are very minimal. And really what Zelensky has been fearing for the past 2+ years is a resumption of Russia's northern offensive. It was the northern offensive, of course, that got him to come to terms with Russia, and they were just one day away from signing a peace agreement, essentially, when that was interrupted by UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson back in April of 2022. This offensive includes the Kherson region. The Russians have declared that if Ukraine doesn't accept their current terms, which are limited to 5 Ukrainian oblasts, including Crimea, then they're going to go for 9 Ukrainian oblasts. And in fact, they already have partially occupied 9 Ukrainian oblasts to this day. So they're making progress. It's relatively incremental, but it's the territorial gains have been increasing with time as this offensive begins.
UK Prime Minister Stormer pretty much just admitted they're fighting a war with Russia through Ukraine. I'm sure you saw this clip, but here it is.
Listening to what she said was this: Sky News, Mr. Speaker, Israel is fighting a proxy war on behalf of the United Kingdom, just like Ukraine is on behalf of Western Europe against Russia. Well, that was certainly noticed in the Russian embassy, because they put out a statement saying the leader of the opposition has finally called a spade a spade. Ukraine is indeed fighting a proxy war against Russia on behalf of Western interests. And they went on to say the illegitimate Kyiv regime, created, financed and armed by the West, has been at it since 2014. So they endorse that. They want the detail. I've given the quote. That's what Russia said in response. She asked me what I believe in. I believe in standing by Ukraine and calling out Russia as the aggressor.
Wow. I believe in standing behind Ukraine and confronting Russia. So he just admitted it. They're using Ukraine for their proxy war against Russia, didn't he?
Yeah, this is just the whole war in Ukraine against Russia. It's just religious. It's become religious dogma for the far left and EU leaders and even neoconservatives. I mean, of course, the Trump administration, and we talked about the possibility that the Trump foreign policy has been hijacked by neocons in opposition to Trump's America First agenda for ending the war, which really he could have done back in January. Shortly after becoming president. So, the Irashnik missile, that IRBM, that is probably one of the most likely ways that we'll see Russia retaliate. Certainly they could escalate to the nuclear level. I mean, we talked about how those Ukrainian strikes, which Trump he didn't criticize Ukraine for those attacks. We haven't seen him criticize Ukraine for any attacks. Lots of strikes against Russian civilians. There was a strike against a Russian train that killed, I think, dozens of civilians. So there's really a double standard. And, we know that it's because of the disinformation that is being fed to him by his neocon handlers in the White House. Not saying that he's not a strong president or a courageous president, or that he doesn't have the ability to break free of that. But it's really going to take folks like Vance and Tulsi Gabbard to help him realize that this is the wrong policy and very much in opposition to U.S. national security interests, because it could lead to nuclear war. Well,
yesterday we saw North Korea come out and say that Kim Jong-un is unconditionally supporting Russia in the war against Ukraine. So you had Russia, Iran, North Korea, China, those 4 nations. This is very dangerous. I mean, this is not something to be escalated, and yet I'm afraid that's where it's going.
Yeah, the Sino-Russian alliance is very real. I mean, we saw, Chinese troops and North Korean troops marching at the victory parade. I think they each had about 100 troops. Of course, the North Koreans, they had, I think, 5 generals in attendance, including a colonel general that commands 200,000 North Korean troops. So and is kind of, I think, the fourth ranked in the North Korean military hierarchy. So, that's a pretty large force that they had fighting alongside the Russians in Kursk. And there's been talk that North Koreans might help Russia invade Sumy Oblast as well.
What the time frame you think for a strike retaliation by Russia?
I think it's imminent. I think it'll happen within the next couple of weeks, most likely days. There's just so many things that Russia could do to strike back, and it could even, directly strike the U.S. or NATO targets. And we're playing with, as Peter Price said, when Biden's war started, he said, we're playing with nuclear fire. And I think those words, I'm afraid those words might be, become very prescient.
I'm afraid so too. Jim Ferguson put this out today. No Putin required. Dead hand will launch Russia's nukes on its own. Buried deep in Russia's nuclear doctrine is dead hand, a Cold War doomsday system that's still active. If Russian leadership is wiped out or communications go dark, dead hand triggers a full-scale automatic and nuclear retaliation. No button, no delay, just global annihilation on autopilot. You agree with that?
I mostly agree with that. So the dead hand or perimeter system is what they say it is. It is an automatic launch system that can launch Russia's entire nuclear arsenal against pre-programmed targets, presumably against the U.S., because there's no real, other than, and of course NATO targets, Britain being at the top of the list. But it has to be activated. So basically, what would happen is, let's say that Russians detected what looked like a strategic missile strike incoming. If that target were to hit Russia, that would be kind of the threshold for them to activate the perimeter system if they thought that a strike was potentially going to interrupt communications, or potentially if that strike was targeting Moscow or the top Russian military and political leadership. Then they turn that system on, and then if in fact the communications were cut, then it would launch on its own. So that's a very dangerous system. There's also been another thing that Peter Pry taught me, is that in Russia there's 3 nuclear suitcases. There's one for Putin, of course, the Russian president. Then there's one for the chief of the general staff, Valery Gerasimov, and then one from the Minister of Defense. And so by default, all 3 of them have to authorize a nuclear strike, even at the tactical level. However, Putin has the ability to turn off their authorizations and authorize it on his own at any time. So really, their system is very similar to ours, in that the president can override any objections from military commanders.
Wow. Let's go to our first clip. We've mentioned Peter Price several times, as many people know already, but reminding any new people, I produced his weekly radio show for a few years, and then produced his TV show when he would fly in, and we would fly him in and put him up at a hotel and give him an honorarium for his time and effort to produce good TV for us. We did this. What are these going back to, Logan? At least 2016, right? So 2016, 2017 is when we started doing these, and all the way up to when he passed away. And he passed away in 2022, right?
Yeah, I think it was August of 22.
It was, right. Here's the first clip. We'll play it and let you comment, David.
Because the truth is, contrary to what official Washington believes, Iran probably already has the bomb. Now, 2 years ago, senior Reagan and senior Clinton administration officials warned that Iran probably already has nuclear weapons. Did you hear about that? 2 years ago. Why didn't this make the front page of the Washington Times and the Washington Post? Why wasn't this advertised all over the evening news on CNN and MSNBC? Not even Fox News reported it. But it's true. 2 years ago, a report was issued, basically through National Review, by these senior Reagan and Clinton administration officials, warning that Iran probably already has nuclear weapons. Now you can see the report Underestimating Nuclear Missile Threats from North Korea and Iran. That's the title of the report. Underestimating Nuclear Missile Threats from North Korea and Iran, which was published on February 12, 2016 in National Review. Underestimating Nuclear Missile Threats from North Korea and Iran, National Review, February 12, 2016. I'm going to quote from that report. Iran is following North Korea's example as a strategic partner allied by treaty and pledged to share scientific and military technology. Iran sacrificed its overt civilian nuclear program to deceive the Obama administration to lift international sanctions, to prevent Western military action, while a clandestine military nuclear program no doubt continues underground. That is why Iran, under the Obama administration's nuclear deal, will not allow inspection of its military facilities and prohibits interviewing scientists. Iran is concealing the dimensions and status of Iran's nuclear weapons program. End quote. I'm going to quote again from another part of the report, beginning this quote. We assess from UN International Atomic Energy Agency reports and other sources that Iran probably already has nuclear weapons. We assess from UN International Atomic Energy Agency reports and other sources that Iran probably already has nuclear weapons.
There you go. And that's reading from, I think, a 2016 report. Okay? Now, I agree with Tucker Carlson on some things, and I very much disagree with him on others. I'm not a big Mark Levin fan. I think Mark Levin is largely full of hot air. I think he, to me, sounds like a guy, in my opinion, having a hysterectomy without any anesthesia. Screaming and hollering and carrying on. I remember when I used to walk one of my labs, can't remember which one, probably summer, and he'd be screaming at his callers who were trying to take up the position of the Tea Party. They were taking up the Tea Party position. He was screaming and hollering at them. I think Sean Hannity was doing the same thing. I think that's why Sean Hannity lost his primetime slot to Megyn Kelly. A lot of people, I think, forget that at one point, remember, he lost his slot to Megyn Kelly and had to go later in the night. But these guys, if I remember correctly, these guys were being very critical of the Tea Party movement until they realized their ratings were dropping like a rock. And I think both of these guys, particularly Levin, was a never Trumper and then jumped on board. But they didn't like any criticism of the Republican Party. So I've never trusted Levin, okay? And if if Levin doesn't like that, he's welcome to come on my program and I'll give him equal time to respond. But Tucker put this out. It's going all over the place today. Mark Levin was at the White House today lobbying for war with Iran. Okay, and I agree with him on this one. I don't want to see Levin over there pushing for war. And I wonder if Levin's smart enough to know, as Annie Cyrus laid out last night when I asked her, don't you think it's likely that they already have nuclear bombs in America, small suitcase bombs in America, Iran, or biological weapons? She's like, of course. So was Levin even smart enough to know this stuff? But here's where I have to part company with Tucker. He says, if this sounds familiar, that Iran's weeks away from having nuclear weapons. If this sounds familiar, it's because the same people have been making the same claims since at least the 1990s. It's a lie. In fact, there is zero credible intelligence that suggests Iran is anywhere near building a bomb or has plans to. None. Anyone who claims otherwise is ignorant or dishonest. If the U.S. government knew Iran was weeks from possessing a nuclear weapon, we'd be at war already. Well, again, do we really want to put Tucker Carlson up against Dr. Peter Vincent Fry, former CIA analyst, with his incredible courage? People say, well, he came out of the CIA, Brandon. Let me tell you something. There are good people in the CIA. There are bad people in the CIA, just like there are in any agencies and groups. Peter Fry was a bold guy. And he was so bold that for the very first time on my program, former Congressman Kurt Weldon said, he said, I'm going to say this for the first time. I'm not convinced the deep state didn't hit Peter Fry with some kind of radiation to take him out. Now, he told me that privately, and he said, I've never said this publicly. Well, then when I interviewed him, he said it publicly. Why would he even say that? Because Peter Pry was like his big guy in his staff. You know, Peter Pry's government ranking was so high that when he landed at a military base, they rolled out the red carpet like he was a general. He thought it was silly. He told me stories about how stupid it is when I land and the way they roll out this red carpet and treat me. And he's like, it's just dumb. Can we just get to work, you know? So Peter Pry was not a guy that put on airs, okay? Peter Pry was very blunt. And Michael, or David knows this. Peter was very blunt. He had no problem telling you what he thought. He has no problem telling you if he disagrees with you. It was just Peter Pry. And I respected him for that. He was old school. And maybe that's why he and I got along so well, is because he was old enough to have that kind of rough edge to him, and it didn't offend me because he was older. If we'd been the same age, maybe it would have been a little abrasive to me. But being he was an old school guy, I admired that about him, right? And here he was saying things like, if we had tried to tell the guys on the morning of 9/11 that 9/11 could happen, they'd be telling us all the reasons why it couldn't happen, and then it would happen an hour later. So he was saying things in advance that perhaps, for my interview, Kurt Weldon said, this may have caused him to be taken out. I don't know. But do you really want to put Peter Pry up against Tucker Carlson and all these other guys, including the former CIA director himself, James Woolsey, and say there's no evidence that they have the bomb or possess one now, or we'd already be at war? Maybe we're not at war because they have one, but David, they might actually have nuclear weapons and biological chemicals already in the U.S.
Yeah, it's very possible. There's really no way for sure that we would know that, short of some kind of nuclear sniffers. But even the nuclear sniffers are really used to detect actual nuclear detonations. So they can detect the radiation emanating from even a very small and tiny nuclear device. But in terms of Iran having nuclear weapons, obviously Tucker Carlson's wrong on that one, because first Iran did have a nuclear program back in 2003 that was, according to Dr. Peter Pry, within 3 months of bomb, essentially where we were exactly in I think it was February or probably April of 1945. That's how close they were to having a nuke. And that was 22 years ago. In fact, if you listen to an interview by Kurt Weldon, as I did a while back in 2006, he quoted a CIA report saying that the CIA was predicting that Iran would have weaponized nukes by 2010. So, that's 15 years ago. So the idea that Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons, I think it's a farce. Of course, I understand why Tucker Carlson says that. It's because he was burned very badly when he supported all the false, intelligence, politicized intelligence by the Bush administration that was just really made up completely, where they were saying that Iraq had an active WMD program, when in fact they'd actually destroyed all of their WMD or rendered it unusable by burying it in the ground, and where it was found leaking by U.S. troops, shortly thereafter. So the other thing I wanted to mention is that, there's really no way that we can even stop Iran, short of occupying Iran itself, from developing nukes. And the reason is they could shut down their entire nuclear program, and they could covertly import nuclear weapons parts and enriched uranium from North Korea or from any one of their allies, such as Russia or China, and assemble nuclear bombs in their underground facilities. So this is really, if we go to war with Iran on this, it's going to be a disaster, because we'll be fighting on a false pretext.
Wow. Let's go to the next clip. Dr. Peter Vincent Pry. Here we go.
Strangely, those who would poke the bear over issues merely tangential to U.S. interests are silently complacent about existential threats to America, like EMP attack in Poseidon. Henry Kissinger, in How the Enlightenment Ends, a good article he wrote in The Atlantic in June 2018, warns that civilization may be threatened by failure of governments to comprehend the potential dangers of artificial intelligence, that governments may be overeager to exploit artificial intelligence for defense. Quoting from Kissinger, He wrote, "Science fiction has imagined scenarios of artificial intelligence turning on its creators. More likely is the danger that artificial intelligence will misinterpret human instructions," end quote. Kissinger's right. And almost before the ink from his pen is dry, Moscow is testing its Poseidon robot to deliver a 100 megaton bomb and is already planning to deploy 32 of these monster bomb artificially intelligent machines, doomsday machines off our coasts. The combination of nuclear superweapons and artificial intelligence is an unprecedented new threat that eclipses the invention of the atomic bomb, and that perhaps will end not only the Enlightenment, but mankind.
Well, there you go. Again, these are like 2016, 17, 18, 19, all the way up until the year he died, 2022.
Yeah, I mean, he was an amazing, courageous, and visionary leader that I worked under for several years, and a good mentor, a friend. But he, as you can see, he predicted a lot of the threats we face today, including artificial intelligence. He was someone we should have had at the highest end levels of government with advising Trump on national security policy. In fact,
well, he briefed him. He briefed him while Trump was running the first time on EMP.
He did, yeah, and so did Tommy Waller, the CAO of the Center for Security Policy. So Trump's, he's aware of these threats. He did do this the EMP order in 2019, and there's others that some of our allies are working on with members of the administration to get done that are related. One of which was an order, of course, suspending the shutdown, the planned Biden shutdown of our coal plants to maintain some level of resiliency in the grid over the next few years.
Let's go to the next clip. I mean, these are just so important to play. These are all part of our archives, by the way. If you remember my vault at worldviewtube.com/vault, this stuff is all in there. That's what I'm telling you. There's so much that we've recorded over the years. I keep telling people it's more relevant than the day we broadcast it. This is a perfect example. So all of this, along with other stuff, is at worldviewtube.com/vault. Logan pulled some of these out of the vault and made them into small clips. Here's the next one.
They already have super EMP weapons that are low yield, not high yield, but low yield for making high frequency EMP. It's the Russian way of war to engage in overkill. The super EMP high frequency weapons would probably be good enough to kill us once. But if you also use that high yield, low frequency weapon, you're basically covering the electromagnetic spectrum and making the electromagnetic rubble bounce, as it were. And that is very consistent with the Russian way of war, always going for overkill. So these EMP threats are among the most dangerous nuclear threats we face. Congress and the EMP Commission tried to get President Obama to sign an executive order for 8 years to protect our national critical infrastructures and military forces from EMP, but President Obama ignored that for 8 years. The EMP Commission's long neglected effort to protect the electric power grid and other life-sustaining critical infrastructures should be implemented on a crash emergency basis. And that is apparently what President Trump's EMP executive order is trying to do.
Yep. David?
Yeah, Russia, as Peter explained, Russia has escalation dominance with a variety of weapons that we don't have and probably will never develop. I mean, certainly, obviously, mobile strategic missiles, the Oreshniks, both the super EMP weapons and more tactical level EMP weapons. Conventional EMPs, I think, are something we're close to having. But they have escalation dominance. So if we were to get into war with them, every level we'd escalate to, they could overpower and overwhelm us at a massive level. I mean, all the way from cyber, they have the most powerful cyber offensive capabilities in the world. Super EMP, obviously, they developed them first. They have the most for that, and they have super EMP satellites. They also have their nuclear forces. I mean, the Ukrainian military defense leaked report says that Russia has over 7 times more operational nukes than we do overall. So that's that's pretty daunting. There's no way we could ever catch up, and that's why it's so critical that Trump implement his brilliant plan to transform Russia from an adversary into a strategic partner to neutralize its military alliance with the PRC.
Logan, do we have the one on Satan 2? Do we have that one? That's next. Let's roll this one. Here we go.
Another super weapon they have is the Avant-Garde, which is a hypersonic reentry vehicle that can be carried by any of their ICBMs. A large number of them could be carried by the Sarmat, or the Satan II, and it will be maneuverable so it can penetrate our national missile defenses, although it doesn't need that maneuverability because our national missile defenses were never designed with the sophistication to intercept Russian weapons anyway. But in their paranoia, they've designed it to penetrate our national missile defense, or perhaps that's just disinformation, because they want to mislead us about why it has that maneuverability. They're always saying, well, the Avant-Garde has maneuverability to get through our missile shield. But in reality, this also gives it unprecedented accuracy, making it one of the most effective first strike weapons they've ever had, because the ability to have a maneuvering warhead not only enables you to penetrate our national missile defenses as they currently exist, but it would enable you to have extraordinarily precise accuracy against our hard targets like our missile silos. An avant-garde maneuvering warhead, might be able to strike the silo right on its lid, or get so close to the silo that you don't even need a nuclear weapon in order to destroy it. It could do it perhaps with a kinetic kill, or with a very low yield clean warhead, so that it would limit the amount of fallout and radioactive fallout that would come, and limit the damage to our civilian population. So you could have a very clean surgical nuclear first strike and win a nuclear war with very little risk of U.S. retaliation against their cities, because we would have the damage to our own population would be negligible. That could be the purpose of the avant-garde.
So again, this thing can skip on the atmosphere, multiple warheads. Do we have anything like that?
No, we don't, and we have no plans to develop it either. So the Avant-Garde hypersonic glide vehicle, was famously the Chinese version of that was described as a Sputnik moment. Something that Peter liked to quote, but it was a Sputnik moment according to the commander of U.S. Stratcom at the time. I think it was Admiral Richard. Something that it was a leap in technology that was a generation almost ahead of us. Back when it was tested back in 2021. But essentially, the Russian, the Satan II or the Sarmat, which is either operational or very shortly will be operational, can carry 24 of those hypersonic glide vehicles, the Avant-Garde. So we could have, and the thing about hypersonic glide vehicles is what they do. They launch, they go into a very temporary orbit. They can orbit the entire planet, it's usually like half an orbit, basically. And then they can get to any location on Earth within 30 minutes, which is much faster than, an ICBM, say, from one end of Russia to the other end of the U.S., which could be up to 40 minutes, I think. So, it's not a huge difference, but just imagine what even one of those Sarmat missiles could do, hitting, all 24 of our top targets. It could take out all of our all of our nuclear storage facilities in reserve, taking out all 2,050 of our reserve warheads. It could take out our 2 submarine bases, and it could take out all 3 of our nuclear bomber bases. And of course, it could take out the DC, Pentagon, and Stratcom command as well. And the other targets would likely be the very low frequency relay stations, of which we have about five or more across the United States. And communicate nuclear launch orders to our submarines. And
if I remember correctly, Peter Pry told me they could go stealth, so you may not even know that they are headed your direction, or you may not find out until you only have a few minutes left. And of course, as we've already gone down the timeline and did a whole TV show with Colonel Rob Maness, who was in the division that dealt with the nuclear weapons and one of the 2 or 3 guys that wrote the nuclear football manual that goes with the president everywhere. He did the timeline with us on how little time a president has to respond when you know that it's coming from the first plume on the launch pad. Now take away the fact that you're losing possibly 10, 15, 20 minutes in that time frame. Because Dr. Price used to tell me this thing can go stealth, right?
I'm not aware if it has stealth capabilities, but he was more of an expert on that than I am. I will say that the warning time actually from Zircon hypersonic cruise missiles launched from Russian submarines about 200 miles off the coast. I recently watched a briefing by one of our top nuclear experts, and he explained that the launch time to target is as little as 3 minutes. So we could, there could be a pop-up, and even worse, the Yassin Russian nuclear submarines, the most advanced stealth submarine in the world, are so stealthy that the U.S. Navy is reportedly unable to track them. So they could move their submarines within miles of our coastline and pop off, a few of those, take out DC and the Pentagon and other critical, bases within the capital region before we had a chance to react to it, or certainly for the president to get on Air Force One and escape the White House.
In other words, they could hit those key areas and we wouldn't even know it. Those people would die in those buildings and never knew what hit them.
That's right. And the president, as you alluded to, the president has a very limited time to make that launch decision. And 3 minutes simply isn't enough, I would say. Add to that the fact that it takes 5 to 7 minutes for an ICBM to launch once the order's been received. And then it takes 15 minutes for an SLBM to launch from a Trident nuclear submarine, Ohio-class submarine. And that's assuming that the relay stations are still active. And of course, we also know that China maintains the capability to not only intercept nuclear launch orders, but also to disrupt them with their DC cell tower in Huawei. So there's a very real chance that in a nuclear first strike situation, particularly with Russia, that they could take out all three of our nuclear footballs at the White House, and then we would be unable to regain launch control for days, perhaps weeks, if ever, allowing them to conduct follow-on nuclear strikes at a whim without any fear of U.S. retaliation.
And I guess one of the points we want to make before we go to the last video is this is all the more reason why President Trump needs to get us out of NATO immediately, because these guys are provoking a war with a guy with all this technology.
Exactly. I mean, everyone talks about the Russian threat, the need to weaken Russia. That's the wrong attitude. That what we need to do is flip Russia from an adversary to a strategic partner, make them no longer see us an enemy. Then they might even detarget our cities and on our bases and redeploy, or at least pull back their nuclear forces. That would essentially, end the Russian nuclear threat to the United States, which is the greatest nuclear threat we face. And then we would be able to, we'd still be inferior to China in terms of military nuclear might, but at least we might have a chance to restore some semblance of deterrence with Beijing.
And yet I mentioned on radio and TV today that this company Palantir with the it's contracts with the CIA, the Pentagon, and whatnot. I mean, they've been involved for a while. I mean, this Alex Vaca guy, he said that they were involved in tracking down Osama bin Laden. Their ability to basically track anything and everything around the world, find hidden relationships, maps, terrorist organizations, geospatial analysis. Well, I see here that when Russia invaded Ukraine, Palantir came for help. If its Gotham software took live feeds from satellites, drones, and sensors to pinpoint Russian tanks and artillery in real time, Ukraine could see the Russian units and then decided where to aim their rockets. Okay, here's my concern. If we now have Palantir in the Trump orbit and we're giving them all of these contracts, I mean, billions of dollars, and they're working with our CIA and have been for a long time, and our Pentagon, doesn't that make President Trump not really a neutral negotiator at the table to negotiate between Russia and Ukraine? Because if I'm Putin, I'm going, so you want to sit at the table and you want me to make peace, but you're now in a bigger and deeper relationship with your administration and Palantir, which has been targeting my troops and my tanks and my equipment. And I'm going to sit and have you be the arbiter, the mediator between me and Ukraine. I mean, if you're Putin, why would you do that? And that's number one. Number two, at what point has President Trump been outflanked by the intelligence community? They're making decisions and leaving him in the dark, as we've seen twice in the last few weeks. I'm concerned something's going to happen and President Trump's going to find out about it after the fact. And we've just done something and provided information and support and background, as we've been doing, that Putin knows full well was the United States. And we're all going to wake up and find out we're in a big problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's even worse than that because, the Trump administration, German Chancellor Merz, Friedrich Merz, said that, it wasn't just Germany, France, and Britain that lifted all restrictions, range restrictions on the use of their long-range missiles against Russia. It was the U.S. as well. And I don't recall the White House rebutting that argument. I would think if the Trump White House wanted to be neutral, they would jump and we would have heard an immediate disavowal from the White House that was false.
And a 10-year mineral rights deal between Ukraine and America also doesn't make us a neutral mediator either, does it?
No, especially because that agreement contains a provision that binds us, by treaty to continue providing arms to them over the next 10 years. I mean, that's the exact opposite of what President Trump promised to do. He promised to end the war, and he made lots of threats to pull out of the war in Ukraine, to pull our troops out, to end our intelligence support. But he only did it for 7 days, and that was an amazing step. And when he did that, I'm like, wow, he's really making good on his promises. And then Zelensky agreed to this conditional 30-day ceasefire, and then suddenly he was back in Trump's good graces, despite all of his ridiculous misbehavior and attempts to escalate the war with Russia. That's the amazing thing is. We haven't seen Russian escalation. It's been Ukrainian escalation all along. Zelensky, killing civilian targets, hitting various elements of Russia's nuclear triad, from strategic bomber bases to nuclear naval bases, including both surface ships and nuclear submarines, and then of course hitting their early warning, nuclear ballistic missile defense radars as well, and basically punching a hole, in the radar defense system from nuclear ballistic missile attack. And it's really just been surprising, all the things that we've been told about Putin. He's crazy, he's irrational, he's a war criminal, he's out to conquer all of Ukraine and all of Eastern Europe. And yet he's been incredibly restrained in his responses, to the point where I would say that almost any U.S. president would have, retaliated with a nuclear strike by now if Russia had been doing the same thing, with proxy Canadian forces against, the U.S. strategic nuclear triad with conventional missiles and drones.
Yeah, and I don't understand again why Putin. I mean, I would love to know what Putin says in his private conversations, because I would think he would say, look, Mr. President, I appreciate the phone call or taking my call, but you're not really a moderate mediator here. You're empowering this company, Palantir, that's targeting me, and you're in a financial relationship now, big time with Ukraine. So and you're continuing to let your people do this. So this war that you want to keep talking about, Zelensky, it's not Zelensky. It's NATO and the U.S. and all of your CIA bases all over Ukraine. I mean, let's cut to the chase, Mr. President. Your country is waging a proxy war against me through Ukraine with NATO, and your own deep state intelligence arena is doing it. Now, the question is, are you that in the dark? Are you that oblivious? Or do you know this? Why don't you call me back in 24 hours and you tell me, hey, Mr. Putin, I've been lied to, I've been fooled, I've been in the dark. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. And I have fired X, Y, and Z, and we're doing this and that. You're right. These guys have been trying to get a war going on. Kind of the same way that the generals were trying to get President Kennedy in a war, right? And kept saying, well, let's do this and let's do that and let's invade Cuba and let's carry out some terrorist attacks in Florida and blame it on Cuba. And he's like, are you nuts? So, and then, of course, JFK got so angry. He's like, I'm going to destroy the CIA and bust it into 1,000 pieces and cast it into the wind. I'm concerned that either President Trump doesn't know what's going on, or he does and he thinks it'll still work out. Because if I'm Putin, I'm going, I'm not sure I really want to try to cut a deal with you, because you're acting like you're a moderate mediator or a neutral mediator, and you're not. You're still sitting there in NATO. You're still funding NATO. You're still using the technology. You know, why don't you get your buddy Elon to turn off Starlink, which now that relationship's kind of falling apart today. I would love to know what Putin has really said. Or do you think Putin's just kept his mouth shut? You think he would ever say these things to Donald Trump, to President Trump?
I do, yeah, especially in this last call. I think it was a very frank, cold call. I think in the previous calls it was likely more warm and friendly, but this one I think was really direct. And I think Putin didn't make any buts about Russia's plans for some kind of a major retaliation. I don't want to say massive retaliation because there's so much more they could do, but something major, something we perhaps haven't seen before on the Russian side, and perhaps in terms of targeting Ukraine's defense ministry, or perhaps even the presidential palace.
Why didn't he just go ahead and get rid of Zelensky? I mean, they've already tried to kill Putin, haven't they? Sent drones to his helicopter. Why doesn't he go ahead and just eliminate Zelensky, Putin?
Well, I think Putin, again, he's more restrained.
Why? Why?
That's a good question. I think ultimately it goes down to it sets a very bad precedent. If you assassinate a foreign leader, even during the war, I think the threats to his own life could potentially increase. I mean, who knows? There's some a lot crazier leaders than Putin on the Western side that could perhaps even, try some kind of assassination attempt and try to, pin it on Ukraine or some other, smaller country. But I don't know what the reason is. I think that Putin has always had the capability to defeat Ukraine. I think all he had to do, literally, was not withdraw Russian troops from 30% of Russian-held territory in March and April of 2022. That was just a baffling. I mean, that was the turning point. That was where I went from thinking Putin wants to reunite the Soviet Union to this doesn't compute. If he wants to take over Ukraine, he wouldn't have withdrawn from Kyiv when he was on the verge of outright victory with the Istanbul Agreement, which would have ended the war on largely Russian terms, even though it involved a full Russian military withdrawal from pre-war Ukrainian territory. Because, what they wanted. They got a neutral Ukraine. They got a partially disarmed Ukraine where their army was capped at around 100,000 with, limits on strike weapons to 26 miles. I mean, preventing any of these kinds of long-range missile strikes against Moscow and other targets within Russia.
Let's go to this last clip. Here we go. Dr. Pierre Pride.
I think another clandestine purpose is to go after U.S. submarines and make an electromagnetic pulse attack that would enable them to win World War III. Because this large warhead is actually most useful for those last two missions that Russia doesn't talk about, destroying our submarines and making an EMP attack against North America.
Well, I'm so loyal to people.
Care about none of this. So President Trump and congressional Republicans are on their own to protect America from unprecedented Russian nuclear threats. Among these unprecedented Russian nuclear threats are the Sarmat, a new heavy ICBM that NATO designates as the Satan II, that will have an even heavier throw weight than the SS-18 Mod 1, that's called Satan 1. The SS-18 Satan 1 carries 10 warheads that have yield accuracy combinations so that one of these missiles would be able to destroy 10 U.S. ICBM silos.
Wow. There you go. Well, that was, again, that's Dr. Peter Vincent Price, sadly passed away in August of 2022. Broadcast every Monday on our platform. I produced that radio show every Monday for him. And then he would fly in here and then produce from this studio, from this desk, what you just saw. He tried warning us over and over. And boy, what would he say in closing, David? What would Peter Price say if he were with us today?
He would be saying exactly what he said the last year he was alive, which is we're playing with nuclear fire and we need to make peace, not war with Russia, so we can focus on the Chinese threat. He and I collaborated in some writings and papers along those lines. One of the things he stated, and we've discussed this as well, is that the Russians offered a peace treaty to us, a comprehensive peace treaty in December of 2021 on the 17th. And we rejected it on January 25th outright. We just told them to pound the sand. And that agreement, it did have on the NATO side, he said, it's almost more favorable for the U.S. In terms of our national security than the Russians themselves. And I wouldn't say that, but I think it was mutually favorable. There were three provisions of the 8 terms that. In their agreement with the U.S. that we would have needed to modify, but largely I think that would have been true. And of course, withdrawing it would have included a de facto sphere of influence agreement where we don't interfere in the former Soviet Union in terms of politically or militarily. They wouldn't interfere in the Western Hemisphere or NATO. We of course would get the largest sphere of influence in the world between Russia and China. We wouldn't fly our nuclear bombers within a certain range and nuclear warships within a certain range of Russian airspace and coastlines. And that would apply to them as well. So they couldn't do that to us. Just a lot of confidence building measures that would essentially eliminate the threat of nuclear war with Russia. And we, Biden took it and tore it up and threw it in the trash.
dpine.substack.com, dpyne.substack.com. David, you're becoming a regular because you're an expert on this and it's escalating. And of course, when Putin does go ahead and make his strike, we'll be glad to call you and have you on because we're going to want your analysis to show, wow, he went way beyond what we thought we would do, or he again showed restraint. So I want to get your analysis on that. dpine.substack.com. As always, David, thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Brandon. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you. David Pine checking in tonight. Again, his Substack, DPYNE, dpine.substack.com. All right, folks, before we continue tonight, don't forget, great products. Right here is one of them, and that is my Gatatana. I take it each and every day, and, well, it just got brought to me. No joke. That was pretty good timing, babe. I was about to promote it, and you just happened to bring it. I think, the longer we're married, the more I think you read my mind. But there it is. I take it each and every day. You see me take it on the set. Gatatana. Dolly, you had yours this morning. Half a scoop on her food every day. I take a full scoop. One scoop, the equivalent of 90 billion plant cells. 90 billion. This has got, by the way, 5 clinical trials behind this one. This one takes away a lot of my cravings for junk food. Come on. What do you think you're going to do? Take my Gatatana? I already gave you. You got yours this morning. This is mine. You had yours on your food. Takes away my craving for junk food, Dolly. And gives me lots of energy and all kinds of protein. Lots of protein in this. Amino acids, trace minerals, all kinds of great things. So again, I take it each and every day. And remember, I'm not making claims, but remember the guy that started this, he got a very serious and terminal diagnosis. So he started eating the plankton he was raising for his shellfish. His daughter was like, are you crazy? And he went in for some biopsies, 11 of them, came back benign. He went on to live another 10 years. I'm not making claims, I'm just telling you history. He went on to live another 10 years, retired to Hawaii, I think it was. Went on to live well into his 80s. So anyway, A lot of people got a subscription to this one. I have a subscription to this one because I don't want to run out. And it's got to come, I think, from Oregon. That's a little bit of a ways from Tennessee. So I don't want to have to run out and then order it and then wait for it to ship. That's a long way to ship. That's going to take a few days. And I want to take it each and every day. So I would urge you to get a subscription, and a lot of you have. Our two most popular health sponsors are Bella Grace and Gatatana. Numi's catching up, but you guys should be doing all three. But Bella Grace and Gatatana, these are the two biggest right here. MelissaHouseGPA.com, MelissaHouseGPA.com. And again, cheers. All right, that's nutrition there, baby. All right, check it out. Right there, MelissaHouseGPA.com.